Well, hi there. You're watching The Dan Show. I happen to be Dan. I sometimes go by Daniel, sometimes Dan the Man. And I also happen to be a fan of Jimmy C, which we will get into a little bit later. He sometimes likes to call me Danny K. It's kind of a shorthand that we have. But right now, joining me, I have Katriana. How are you doing today,
Hi,
Katriana?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. You seem to be somebody who likes stuff.
I
Who
do.
doesn't?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people like stuff, but what stuff? Well, I think that is different for everybody. It depends on who you are. But right now, what we're going to talk about is the kind of stuff that we won't be getting for quite some time, and that happens to be a bunch of Disney movies, which you may know as Star Wars movies or Avatar movies or Avengers movies. Well, it's looking like a lot of them are not going to be here anytime soon. Right before we were about to start the show, we got this news that dropped, and it's a big one. Disney announced that they're shuffling up basically their entire theatrical release calendar. Including the Marvel movies, the Star Wars movies, the Avatar movies, even Deadpool, Moana, like all of these movies. I mean, Moana didn't have a release date, so now it has one. But Deadpool 3, for example, good news there. We're getting that one 5 months sooner than we thought we would. And a lot of the other big ones, like the Avengers movies, including Kang Dynasty, Secret Wars, they're all getting pushed by, on average, like 5, 6 months to a year. So I'm just going to scroll down. I mean, this is an article on the Hollywood Reporter. You can Google it. You can find it. We'll put a link in the description of this video. But in summary, here's like a whole list of date changes. So you have like Captain America Brave New World, which used to be called New World Order. They recently changed the name on that movie. That's getting moved by a couple of months from May of next year to July. Thunderbolts is getting moved from July, which was the previous. Now that's when Captain America comes out. So Thunderbolt moves to December, and next December was supposed to be Avatar 3. Now Avatar 3, because that's where Thunderbolts is going to come out, Avatar 3 is getting pushed to December 25 by a year. Now, of course, as we all like to say, it wouldn't be an Avatar movie if it wasn't delayed. So that much, I think, was expected by most people. Like, it would seem too good to be true that we were going to get that in 2024. And we'll be talking a lot more about Avatar later in the show. But right now, Katrina, I want to throw it to you. Of all of these date shifts that you're seeing, which, by the way, on your screen, you're seeing like 12, 13 movies. And if I keep scrolling down, there's more. So, like, right at the bottom of that list, you have the two Avatar movies beyond Avatar 3, 4, and 5 now are coming out in 2029 and 2031. So a franchise that started in 2009 took what is it, like a 13-year break, and now it came back with a sequel that made almost as much money as the first one did. Blows my mind. But now the third movie is going to be coming out basically 2 years later, and then the next two after that kept, each of them got pushed by 3 years. That's a long time, especially considering that James Cameron keeps saying they've been filming 3 and like 4 back to back, basically. So why? I mean, why the 3 year gap? Plus, also, what do you think about all these date changes? All of these Avengers movies, everything, we're getting them like years later than we expected.
Yeah, first off, these like 3-year date changes, I mean, that's just what they put so far. How much you want to bet it's going to be pushed even more? And
Uh,
didn't I, like, before we even saw this article, didn't I just say to you, you were like, oh, yeah, like the next one's coming out in 2024? And I'm like, how much you want to bet that's going to be changed? And then you found this article, and then we looked at it, and then we saw like the fifth one's going to be in 2029.
no, the
Um,
fifth one's going to be 2031.
or 2030. Oh, right, right. Yeah.
The
Okay.
fourth one is going to be
Right.
2029. So it's
Okay. Yeah. Even
what?
so.
I mean, it's insane. You look at the like I said, the franchise began in 2009.
Yeah.
Like, and well, the first movie to the second one, I get the difference because, well, you had the pandemic delay it. They had to invent new technology to do underwater motion capture. They had so much to do, so I understand the delay there, all the circumstances. Um, but it's not like they stopped producing after the movies and making stuff after the second one. They've sort of continuously rolled on these movies since the second one. So especially
Right.
3 and 4, they were meant to kind
And
of be like Matrix 2 and 3, like, shooting them back to back.
Right, and don't they already I'm pretty sure he's already had most of the scripts lined up by this point too. Like I
Yeah.
think he roughly knows the storylines he wants to go with. And
Yep.
also, like you said, like the first one took like originally what 9 years in total to complete because it was groundbreaking technology. This new one, new groundbreaking technology. So like what do they have to show for these next ones that's really giving them a reason to push it so long?
I don't know. I mean, it's all I can see right now is this 2023 right now, and it's going to be 2031 by the time we get the last of these movies, which is
Maybe if
it
that.
blows my mind. It honestly blows my mind.
Yeah. And then yeah, the like the push with all the other movies. And this is all under Disney, is that what it said, the article?
Yep. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
also these are all Disney movies, right? So like Disney owns Marvel, Disney owns Star Wars, Lucasfilm. Disney also as part of their deal to get 20th Century, they got the biggest crown jewel in that 20th Century crown was Avatar. So that's all part
Right.
of their deal now. I have
So,
a
I mean,
yeah,
no,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, could this have anything to do with the current writers' strike? Like,
Yeah,
maybe there's like contract issues or something?
I was gonna ask you exactly that because I think like that's really the big thing here is the fact that this writer's strike is causing, a lot of these delays. Certainly some of the movies that are getting moved by a few months at a time, I think that's to do with the writer's strike because
Mhm.
it's it makes sense. Some of these are in production, so they're not really necessarily that deeply affected by the writer's strike. However, some of the later ones that haven't gone into production or stopped production, like Blade, for example, you could see it got pushed from September of 2024 to February of 2025. That's a movie that we know they stopped working on because literally the day before the writer's strike started, they had hired a new writer. And then we were like, oh, and then WGA goes on strike, and this movie that's
Right.
already been rewritten 5 times, of course, so they're gonna be delayed because of that. So 2025 should give them enough time to get back up and running, unless the writer strike goes on forever. Which I mean, the last one went for 6 months. Even 6 months today would be devastating for a lot of these movies. I can almost guarantee you that these movies will get delayed again if the writer strike goes for 6 months, because that
Right.
just changes when do you get some of these projects off the ground. Like Avatar 3, 4, and 5, I bet you they are also probably affected by the writer strike, because if they are going to do any kind of rewrites, you can't do rewrites if the writers are striking.
Right.
So, and then there's Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four is a movie that getting pushed by 3 months, partly probably because of the writer's strike, because I think they're still working on the script. They're still in early development for the most part. I think I don't even think they've announced the cast yet. So there's all of these movies. The Kang Dynasty recently changed out the writer. So the writer that they had on board is not going to be the same one. He also did Quantumania, and of course Quantumania wasn't the best movie. So I think that was one of the reasons why I think it was what's his name, Jeff Loveness or something. Basically, the writer of Quantumania was going to write Kang Dynasty. They said no, thank you, because it seems like he's probably not ready for that yet. So now a new writer was probably going to be brought in, but with the writer's strike, that also gets affected. And yeah, all the Star Wars movies. I mean, they announced that there's now going to be 2 Star Wars movies coming out in 2026, one in May and one in December. The one in May most likely is going to be the one with Daisy Ridley coming back as Rey. I refuse to call her by her taken last name, just Rey. It looks like that movie's going to come out in May of 2026. Which it was supposed to be December 2025, so that got moved by like 7 or 5 months, I guess. And then they are filling the December date in 2026 with a new Star Wars movie, whereas originally that December 2026 was going to be Avatar 4. And then now Avatar 5, which was going to be in December 2028, got moved to 2031, which is insane. That's not even the same decade that we are in.
You
It
know,
just blows me,
like I
literally.
think one of the craziest things about this strike is that it's not like a lot of the movies coming out lately have been really phenomenal. And so it's like, why now are they striking? Like it would make sense if these were like great movies and they really felt really underappreciated for all their work.
Yeah.
But nothing's been good, you know?
Well, so the strike has to do with the fact that these unions have contracts, like collective bargaining agreements that
Right.
expire. So like the previous agreement expired and they weren't able to negotiate a new one in time, and therefore they're striking. And the big thing about the strike is, which by the way, if you are following, we cover the strike on our weekly show on the weekends on the channel. Angelina has done a great job of kind of describing what the situation is like over there in LA because she's down there. She's, sees people, she knows people who are affected by the strike. And it's one of those situations where the writers are just not getting paid very fairly right now. They don't get the royalties that they should for the residuals from TV shows on streaming. So there's a lot of problems with shows having half as many episodes as they used to, and yet the writers now they basically don't get the residuals they used to, so they're kind of getting squeezed from all sides. And that means most writers are now gig workers. They can't really rely on a job full time for a year, a couple of years. If you have a show on the air for 5 seasons, you may still be doing side gigs because that is not making you enough money to be able to support yourself. So that's something which the writers obviously, they want to be able to have a stable career. You can't, work 5 jobs a year, 2 jobs at any given moment in time, and still have trouble making ends meet, because I don't think that's a fair living wage. So that's something where I think most people agree they should be getting compensated better. And that's
Oh,
really what
no,
this.
definitely. Yeah. But that
Yeah.
being said, though, do you think it's kind of like a chicken egg situation, right? Like, it's like, are the films that have been coming out lately not so great because the contracts weren't great for them, therefore they couldn't expend enough energy to write better stuff? Or is it
I would
they just
say,
weren't writing
I don't
great
know
stuff
if those are,
anyway?
no, I don't think they're directly connected in that sense. Like, I would argue that a lot of each movie is its own animal, and so what's been happening of late is studios are chasing franchises. The IP is king, as it's been the case for not for decades at this point. It's not something brand new, but it's continuing to get more and more like studios rely on these big IPs to make them the money that helps them do a lot of the other stuff that they do. Like, for example, if a big studio makes 5 big franchise movies, and those franchise movies bring in the money they need to support like 8 other smaller indie projects or lesser known projects. That's kind of how a lot of studios work. However, it seems like the last few years, especially post pandemic, with the rise of streaming services, which I think we're kind of past the bubble burst last year. So now everybody's working towards profitability. They're no longer just worried about pumping money into the whole thing and see how far we can go with a subscriber count. But in that chase for subscribers, in that race to become the most dominant streaming service, what we ended up having is a situation where a lot of these pieces of content, as it's a derogatory term. It's considered derogatory, I think rightfully so, because it kind of puts everything in the same bucket. But basically, all of these movies and TV shows, they've been pushing for volume, and that means quantity over quality, and that's really where the problems, I think, emerged. That we started to get a diminishing returns effect, especially with the MCU. Biggest example I can give you, the Phase 4 was kind of trash for the most part. Even the new Star Wars movie, they got worse as they went. I mean, the Rise of Skywalker is probably, I think most people agree, even worse than the prequels, which is saying a lot. Like it's saying a lot. Like I don't know if you could have done worse than the prequels. Like George Lucas didn't even direct those. He was just like, yeah, we'll figure it out in post. I'm sure they did better more than that in these new movies, but somehow they managed to get the worst results. But I think that's really where that comes from. It comes from the fact that they were chasing quantity over quality, and they wanted to fill out these catalogs on these streaming services. Whereas now, I think that everybody's starting to work toward profitability. Disney, brought Bob Iger back out of retirement for the 100th time, and he's working to get Disney back into the black, and making Disney Plus profitable, which I think they have been profitable for the last quarter or two, and now their focus is quality over quantity, and that means spacing some of these new projects out. But also, of course, with the strike, they have to push them back because you can't get working on some of these projects until the writers are back.
Right.
But to kind of wrap this part of the conversation, I wanted to ask you, of all of these movies that have been pushed, do any of them stand out to you in particular? Like any of them that you're particularly excited or disappointed about the news that they're getting pushed? Like for me, the one that surprised me was the Alien movie, because I know there was one in development. It never had a date, and I thought it was going straight to Hulu, like Prey did last year, the Predator film. But it looks like that's going to be out in theaters in August of 2024. That one stood out to me. Which one of these stood out to you, if any?
I was actually also going to say Alien because I didn't even know they were making another one. But based on how the last ones have been going, I'm gonna try to not get too excited for it. I'm a big Alien fan, but only like the first couple, obviously. So, yeah. And then all the avatars are always going to be interesting to me, regardless of how I feel about them. Speaking of which, so Dan, how did you feel about Avatar 2, by the way?
How do I feel about Avatar 2? That's an interesting question. Let's see. I felt like Avatar 2, it did a lot of new things, yes. However, it also treaded water, no pun intended, on a lot of things. Like in terms of the story mechanics, it's a very simple story. And you know what? One of the reasons why these Avatar movies do so well, like 76% critic score, it made like $2.5 billion almost, is because the story isn't super complex. So it's able to connect with an audience in a way that's in a way that works for as big an audience as possible. Everybody around the world loves these movies. Like if you look at the box office for
Wait,
Avatar,
they do? Every
yeah.
person I talk to never really likes them, except for you and me.
Are you sure? Okay, well, look at these numbers. Look at the box office for Avatar: The Way of Water. It made $2.3 billion worldwide over the course of its box office run. That accounts for that's the third highest grossing movie of all time. Like,
true.
so,
But
and when you look at the breakdown, $1.6 billion worldwide, and like almost like 700 million domestic. So there's a lot of people out there watching these movies. I mean, I think it's maybe like a lot of people on the internet has become like a meme kind of a culture thing. I think more
I
people
don't
like
know.
these movies than maybe a lot of us realize.
People watch them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they like them. Pretty much every person, like I said, who I talk to about Avatar, they're always like, this was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. And this is only like the first Avatar. I don't talk to people about the second one because I didn't like the second one. So I guess I'm not going to really try to defend it. But no, I don't know. Like you're the only person I feel like I can actually have a conversation about it with who's genuinely passionate. Yeah, I don't know. Second one, I don't know how I feel about the second one, man. It's like you said, it wasn't really. I mean, look, the first one wasn't even an original story either, and we know that. Like we've talked about that. But we both could agree that it was a way to get people interested in this new concept with this new world and interested in like the graphics and all that and the new technology, and it was all exciting and innovative and everything. And then we're thinking, oh well, at least I was like, look, this is a great setup for an interesting world, and as we continue and progress, it's going to get more interesting and maybe more different and more of an original script. And no, it wasn't. Like the second one was just kind of like we were talking about this, right? It felt like a repeat of one. It was like we kind of had to redo it, revisit Pandora because it had been 13 years, and it was just kind of weird to see like it was like a rehash. Hey, remember this? Remember when Jake did this? Well, now Quaritch is gonna do it too. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll say this though, like in my defense, or in terms of me defending Jimmy C here, who, as you can tell, I'm a fan of. Some of that stuff you had to do, right? Because we talked about the
Sure.
fact that, okay, so the first movie was a singularly unique phenomenon in the sense that it blew you away with the spectacle of the visuals, how good it looked for 2009. I know it's 2009, you're like, yeah, Jurassic Park looked good in 1993, but you know, in
Hey, it
2009.
still looks good. Still looks
It
good.
still does. Yeah. I mean, celebrating 30 years, going strong. I still think the first movie is the best one in the franchise. However, as far as this Avatar fan thing goes, I think the first movie was so unique and it was so ahead of its time, you know, especially before the MCU took off and all the new Star Wars movies and the new DC stuff, all that stuff came out. It stood out. The second movie, I think, because it was 13 years in the making, and it wasn't one of those things where unless you saw the original again, or you went to the park, or you somehow interacted with the IP in some manner, that a lot of people didn't really have an opportunity to. Like the average moviegoer, it's been 13 years. Now, granted, they didn't forget about the movie existing, but it wasn't really in the cultural zeitgeist. And you have had things like Avengers Endgame come out. So you have had all these big cultural events. I think they needed to sort of establish a baseline where this is something that the MCU used to be really good at, and they haven't been since Phase 4, which is making each and every entry in the franchise an entry point for a new fan. Like, I think part of what made Avatar 2 a little redundant in terms of how, especially the first act, was the fact that they were kind of retreading some of the story points that they've already done before, because they wanted to make sure that if somebody was watching this movie first and hadn't seen the original Avatar, they could follow along and they can kind of get an idea of what the heck is going on. However, I do agree with you that it felt like the longer that movie went on, they really didn't do enough to move beyond what was already kind of set up in the first movie.
Right.
And they relied really, like, I think James Cameron was like, look, all this fancy water stuff. I mean, you know, like, I think he maybe thought that that would be the ultimate selling point. And look, who's to argue? They made like $2.5 billion. I think they you know, made their money back, or at least, like, you know, this wasn't a movie that lost money by any means, even if the budget was like $1 billion. It's not a movie that failed by any means whatsoever. How, in terms of the story, though, I do believe that they could have broken a lot more new ground than they were able to, because ultimately
Right.
the whole movie is Jake and what's the name of the
Neytiri.
no the is it, so who, why am I forgetting the bad guy in Avatar?
Quaritch?
Corage? Is it Corage?
Yeah. What's his name? Something Lang.
Look at how forgettable some of the character names are, like beyond the main to the two characters.
Yeah, that's another problem too.
Like, I know who plays him, right? Like Stephen Lang plays him. It's
Stephen Lang, yeah. Quaritch, yeah. See?
It's the most
believe
like
me.
unearthly Earth name of an Earth character who's an Earth human, like Quaritch. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
are you from Lord of the Rings? Quaritch? Like, okay, whatever. Anyway, so basically the second movie ended up being like a personal feud continued between Quaritch and Jake. Which, granted, the first movie, that's kind of what came to a head, but I was like, I thought we were done with this. Quaritch literally dies. Spoiler alert, he literally dies at the end of the first movie.
Yeah, 13 years
I'm
later.
like, you literally resurrect him, an AI version of him, basically. Or I guess his brain got downloaded into a computer, got put into an avatar bot. The amount of like hoops they had to jump through to bring Quaritch back, and it would have been fine if he wasn't like the central focus of the new movie. But where it lost me was the fact that in Avatar: The Way of Water looks fantastic. However, the whole story is all about literally taking the last fight of the first movie and expanding it into an entire movie unto itself, while giving Neytiri
and
Jake.
ruining other people's lives, right? Well, okay, and this is what I was also going to say.
Yeah.
This, like, it's like he didn't even consider that there was a fan base for the original movie, and didn't even think like, well, what can we do to expand on that for the people who actually do like it? It was just as if there had never been a first one and there had never been fans previously. So that was kind of insulting. One. Two, what did you just said? The Quaritch. Oh yeah, no, his feud with Jake Sully. But the thing is like, it all was kind of set up to seem like he had more of a feud with Neytiri, because he finds out it was Neytiri who you know, spoilers from 13 years ago, killed him with the arrow. And like, because he looked at the footage, and then you're set up with this whole thing, and then that kid Spider, you know, he finds out, oh man, you know, they're setting this whole thing up. Hey, Neytiri has like 2 lines of dialogue, but what a fighter she is. She's really scary. Let's see what's going to come of this. And then the end of the movie, it's all she leaves with the kids, and then it's just Jake versus Courage again. Like, I don't understand what happened with that setup. Like, you even the fact that they even were willing to acknowledge the original ending, that it was Neytiri that did it. It's not like they pretended and were like, "Oh, oops, yeah, like, let's just pretend it was Jake who did it." They genuinely acknowledged that's what happened. They acknowledged the real facts, and then they were just kinda like, "Let's see where this goes," and then just threw it out the window,
And
you know?
you know what the biggest thing for me about when you so apparently when they were writing the second movie, and I think they wrote the second, third, fourth, and fifth sort of back to back, or in the sense that they had all the story points mapped out and then they fleshed out the script for the second and third one back to back. James Cameron said they had to like almost do a full rewrite on at least once, if not twice, over the course of all those 13 years that it took for them to make the second one. So when I think about that, I look at and I think to myself, okay, so you spent literally years on the script. How could you not come up with anything a little more inventive? Like I
Yeah,
get
I
what's going
know.
on, but it's and I do again address the point that they want to make this as accessible to as big of an audience as possible. Hence why these movies make so much money and everywhere. It's not just like they're popular in a few countries and or just domestically and not abroad. And when I say domestic, I mean US and Canada. But these movies work across the board clearly because they're making so much money and they're rated pretty highly. Audiences love it, critics love it. However, I do wonder like it doesn't take much to add a little more layer, like a few more layers in terms of complexity, like story wise.
Well,
It's
just
just a
don't
very surface
underestimate
level
your
narrative.
audience. Yeah, don't underestimate the audience. Like,
Yeah.
just we can figure it out. Give us something, I don't know, make us work for our thoughts. Like, don't just throw it all at us like that. And,
Yep.
you know, I don't know. It's just like kind of going back to the script conversation. I mean, that he did some rewrites. I mean, did they just leave the first draft of dialogue? Like, it all the dialogue felt like a placeholder, and then they stuck with it. I think I'm gonna be honest, I really tried to hang on to this movie and just, like, enjoy it, but it really lost me once the kid was talking to the whale, and then we saw the whale's dialogue, and it said something about, "It's too painful to remember." I just kinda felt like I was watching an episode of South Park because they actually did that with a killer whale. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where the kids were at like a sea park and they thought this killer whale was genuinely talking to them, but it was just some guys up in like the announcer's studio, like voicing the whale and saying like, "Oh, I used to be free" and stuff. That's what I felt like I was watching. And also, side note on that, the kids are learning the sign language thing, to talk to each other underwater, all that stuff. But how does that translate into them then understanding the whale's language? Like, sure, the whales could read their sign language, but then how do you understand what a whale's saying? Like, what
It's
was this?
I think didn't they wasn't there like some level of like they can use like the connecting like their ponytail that connect, is that how he talked to them? I mean, I forgot exactly. Or
I
because
don't
the
think
whale
they
was kind of
did.
making sound. Yeah, you know what? There is a bit of a leap. There's a couple of leaps that they made there. Um Agree. Yeah, yeah. Okay. We can keep diving into the like the into what is clearly an abyss of critiques because there's a lot about these movies that is great, but there's also a lot about these movies you can look at and it falls apart as soon as you scrutinize it beyond just the surface level. So I want to kind of go through a list of questions we put together, and then we'll talk about what's to come in the future with this franchise, especially now with the movies getting pushed back, the 3, 4, and 5. But I want to ask you a couple of questions, right? Avatar fatigue. I'm worried that are we getting too much Avatar too fast? I mean, this question I
How?
initially.
They've
Okay, hold on.
delayed it. Sorry.
No,
Good. Good.
let me defend that state question. I wrote this question before the news came out, like literally an hour or so ago when we started taping this, that they just delayed 3, 4, and 5. However, I still think this is a valid question to ask. Too much too fast, because there's now going to be 3 sequels coming out, let's say between 2025 to 2031. That's like 6
Maybe.
years apart. Maybe, yeah. Well, but like, let's hope that they stick to it this time, and then let's assume, because that's the information you have to work with right now. But is that going to lead to franchise IP burnout? And this kind of ties into the conversation we've already been having, because when you think about how little new ground they covered, outside of the fact that oh yeah, whole new ecosystem, we're going underwater, the visuals look fantastic, but from a storytelling and character development standpoint, the new movie didn't do enough for me to make me believe that. Kind of like with Matrix 2 and 3. There's some people will love them. I think those movies missed on entertainment value, but they just jumped the shark way too many times in those sequels. And while I'm not saying they're jumping the proverbial shark in these movies, because the worlds are so fantastic as is, I think it would be hard to jump a shark in these worlds. I mean, other than literally if there's a shark on Pandora. But where I get concerned is the second movie kind of felt like an episode of a larger story. It didn't feel like the first movie that was very standalone. And if that is anything to go by, I'm worried that these next three movies are gonna feel like they're kind of the same thing, except now we're just moving forward in time and following these characters as they go on new adventures. So I get concerned, like, am I gonna get tired of that? Like, even people are at this point tired of the MCU. And I know that these movies make a lot of money and a lot of people like them because of the visual spectacle, but you can only impress people so much with visual spectacles. Like where do you go? Like, it's not like Pandora all of a sudden is going to become something completely different. I mean, maybe there's a desert on Pandora that looks very different, but like, we've been watching desert movies since the first Star Wars movies that have been in Lawrence of Arabia. Like, it's not like a particularly different environment. So what I get concerned is are we going to get tired of this franchise? What do you think?
So, I mean, you make a good point, but I also think that you could look at that as like maybe what could be the positive in all of this, because James Cameron, Jimmy C, I don't know if I'm allowed to call him that, but
I'll allow it. Yeah, I'll
okay,
allow it.
Thank you. So he has basically been relying on the technology being the driving force of this whole franchise so far. And so with these new ones coming out and probably not having enough time to have a new, like, exciting technological advancement on, like, what's he going to do next? But at the same time, it's like he now can just hopefully focus on the story, focus on the script, make that what's interesting as opposed to just the technology, because he clearly seemed like he was overwhelmed with making sure it was all cool looking, and they figured that out. Like, both first movies were an experiment and he was the one doing the entire thing himself. And so if he already has it all figured out for himself now, hopefully he's not going to be doing a new thing. I don't know, where they're going to be in space next or something. But well, they've been in space, but you know what I mean, like literally filming it in space or something. But at this point, it's like now he can just actually try to focus on what matters. It's not just supposed to be a roller coaster ride. It's not supposed to be like how Marvel has been like a theme park adventure thing. I mean, this is what it's been, a theme park adventure, Avatar, but it could be a story. He has
but they do have a
interesting
theme
characters.
park. They do have a
Well,
theme
that's
park.
true. Yeah. They do. Yeah.
I'm just saying.
But they do. Yeah. I've heard it's not great. I've never been. But, I don't know. I think, what else can he focus on? Like, please, God, let it be at the script, the dialogue,
Yeah.
the
Well,
story.
you had a question earlier that I want to bring up here. You wanted to ask about, well, why did they switch focus from the main characters so quickly, like leaving the Omatakaya clan and going to Metcaina? I mean, obviously, partly it's because they were like, oh, water, something different. If you just made another movie of Avatar in the forest world part of the planet, maybe it'll be even more repetitive. So I can see why they made that change. But tying into kind of what you were talking about, like, do you think we're gonna actually move past Jake and Neytiri at any point, or are we just gonna stick with them?
Well, they kind of already did in the second one. They made it. I mean, Jake was the narrator again and everything, but they focused more on the kids, which I personally think that was kind of too soon. What was wrong with exploring Jake and Neytiri more, or even making Neytiri a narrator for once? Seeing her perspective of things. Why was she just pushed to the background? Like, she's such an important character. and she's interesting, and they kind of just made her like, all right, well, you're a mom now, so what do you
I
have
was
to
actually
add, you know?
disappointed. Yeah, because she was barely in the movie. She was really,
Yeah,
and she was a huge part of the first movie. I was really disappointed to see that she did not have as big of a role. It's almost like the Wasp in the new Quantumania film. Like she was just there to be there because she was in the title of the movie. It felt like, and that's kind of how Neytiri got treated in this sequel. Now, I do want to ask, like, why do you think a lot of what was set up in the end of the first movie in terms of the future of the forest tribe, why did they just kind of, oh yeah, they're back, the RDA is going to destroy more of the forest than ever before with more of an ease, and they just kind of like glazed over that part and said, oh, water. Like, do you think that was again because they just, James Cameron was like, well, if we're going to sell this thing, we can't just redo what we did last time with a different story. We need a whole different world environment. and and do you even think that's partly because he's so into water, like is his obsession, like, and Jimmy C just loves
definitely.
water, and so he was like, I need to make this thing a spectacle in a new technologically groundbreaking way, or do you think there was a different reason why they just kind of not just dropped a lot of the forest, the creatures and everything, but they literally raised most of the forest to the ground in the opening 10 minutes of the movie, and that said, we're done here, characters are moving on, and we're going into the water? Like, which of those two things was it, or was it a combination of both?
I honestly think it's more so that he was just really excited to show off his water stuff, really wanted to get into that. Because I think if he really cared about the leading it there as an essential part of the story, he could have given himself time. I mean, look, he knows he's making 5 of these things. He could have made the second one. I don't think anybody would have been bored with it being in the forest again. Like, what is boring about this cool planet that looks so realistic? We watch, like, I mean, Lord of the Rings has different worlds and stuff, but like you said, we could have explored like a little bit of the desert, or I mean, we've seen fields and stuff, or we could have seen a little bit of the ocean in this one, like maybe towards the end, you know? And then maybe the third one could have gotten us there. Like, there was no reason to rush it. I think he honestly just is like, I've been down in what's that, Mariana's Trench for so long, and I just want to share with you guys my cool experiences, and
I mean,
let's
not that
get
they
to
went
it.
anywhere as deep in the water as the
No,
Mariana.
that's true.
They were basically in lagoon world, like for most of the
Yeah.
movie. So,
Yeah. The Maldives or something,
yeah, okay,
or the
so
Maldives.
yeah, well, yeah. But I would agree with you though that I think it's his obsession with the idea. He's kind of like George Lucas in that way, and they're kind of
Yeah.
cut from the same cloth, and we kind of know this, right? They came into the industry, kind of came up around the same time, had cross paths multiple times. Like George Lucas produced the Terminator movies, I think, right? Like, or am I wrong about that? And then Jimmy C directed James Cameron. Sorry, I
Yeah.
feeling a little conscious about calling him Jimmy C right now for some reason. But like he directed Terminator 2, Judgment Day.
Yeah.
There's other franchises where they've collaborated, and even like with ILM, like facilitated a lot of those effects in like the Terminator movie. So they're kind of cut from the same cloth in the sense that they want to like do groundbreaking things with technology and move the art and craft of filmmaking forward with each project that they do. And I think that's definitely a big driving point. But I think in the second movie, at some points in the movie, especially the third act, by the time you got there, it felt like that will to drive the technology of filmmaking forward. It's sort of, it was at the detriment of the story a little bit.
Right.
So
Well, because you make a good point. Like, yeah,
yeah,
Terminator 2 had new technology and everything with the liquid, like the liquid metal or
the,
whatever.
the,
But there was still a great story. There was still great dialogue. Like, they didn't
and it was a
sacrifice
simple
anything.
concept story, but it was very
Yeah.
effective and it was
Mhm.
so very well executed. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, these Avatar movies are technically very well executed. I just wish that I came walked away from Avatar: The Way of Water thinking it was more than just Quaritch coming back for
Mhm.
revenge against Jake, which
Yeah.
that's what it was. Now, one thing I will say though, in addition to what we already talked about, the fact that the whole movie was basically just a feud for that, and should have ended that did end at the end of the first movie, just reignited because of all kinds of sci-fi stuff that happened. But not only that, by the end of the movie, it was pretty clear that this isn't the end of this whole feud. It's sort of like it's like Korich and Jake are the Jedi and the Siths of this universe. Like it's or the Batman and the Joker, like arch enemies that will forever be on the. I mean, although they kind of hinted that maybe Korich is gonna come to, for the sake of his spoiler alert, son, his human son that we did not know, even like he had no, like in the first movie, had no clue, like, oh, he had a baby, like who, how, like whatever. Anyway, but like I guess it does. But they use that, I think, as a means to probably slowly bring him onto the good side of the Na'vi. The good side being around, it's like a slippery slope, I guess. Maybe, well, from the perspective of the Avatar franchise, the humans are the bad guys. So yeah, the Na'vis are the good guys. But I do worry that given how the second movie ended, will these future films, 3, 4, and 5, continue to have more of these unoriginal script ideas, kind of going along the concept of this is now just a TV show, but in a movie form. So each movie feels like an episode, and it doesn't really go a bunch of new places outside of the environments that they explore. The stories seem to just be very dry.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've already kind of answered that based on the fact that it's like there's the couple of highest grossing films of all time, and like there's no reason, like why would they see that they need to change anything if they're making so much money? Like you said, like phase 4 was terrible. People obviously recognize that they lost money. So then they were like, oh, maybe we can't just pump this out as a, if you just focus on the money, it's not going to work. I mean, maybe by the third one, it will start to lose money. And then hopefully that will kind of open some eyes that there needs to be more than this, or it'll be canceled altogether. But I doubt that. I'm sure James Cameron will still keep funding this all himself.
I don't think he'll fund it all himself, considering how expensive these are. I mean, he has money, yeah, he does, but I don't think he's gonna lose the support of a studio. However, I do believe when the Avatar 2 was being made, there wasn't any guarantee that past 3 they would be able to make all 5. The second movie had to do well. I mean, and yeah, it made like $2.3 billion. So it made more than enough, I think, for Disney to be like, yeah, we'll continue to make more, and as many as you like, probably. I mean, by the time 2031 comes around, I'm like, if he says, oh, we're doing even more, or we're doing, other stuff after, is he going to be doing Avatar for the rest of his life? I mean, I don't know. Maybe he will. But the next question that I want to ask is, will these upcoming sequels lead to diminishing returns? Like we've been talking about the fact that, okay, there's only so much you can do to wow an audience. Like we talked about, are people going to get fatigued by seeing more and more of the same, or just different enough but still kind of similar than what we've seen before? Because the first movie and the second movie, they had a 13-year gap. The first movie was so groundbreaking. The second movie still to many degrees groundbreaking. You can tell the first and 2 movies, there's a difference in quality of the animation and the texturing and everything. There is definitely a difference. And that's the advancement in technology over that time that shows in the technical execution of the movie. But still, now that we're going to get 3 more sequels within a decade's time, I mean, yeah, maybe they'll be delayed more. But for the time being, let's assume that they come out on the currently announced dates of 2025, 2028, and 2031 for 3, 4, and 5 in the series. Do you believe that each of these successive movies are going to make less and less money? Because the first one made like 2.7 billion, the second one made 2.3, so there's already been a slight drop. Now, granted, you could say in the grander scheme of things, anything that makes over $2 billion, any studio will take any day of the week. So as long as they keep making at least that much, I think they'll be fine. But I do worry that, much like the Transformers movies, like their box office eventually dropped off a cliff because the quality kind of stagnated, if not went down. So I worry, do you think each of these sequels can make as much or more money than the prequels, or are we just going to start to see more diminished returns?
I honestly think it relies heavily on like the other Marvel movies and stuff, and the other films that are coming out, and how well they're going to be doing. I think 2 was lucky enough that, as okay as it was, I think it did so well because people were getting so sick of Marvel by that point. I don't know if that's going to continue for Marvel. Maybe these next movies, like now, like you said, that they're going to be focusing on, well, once the strike's over, we'll see, that they're going to be focusing on quality over quantity, that you know, they may be better. Maybe people will get a second win and they'll be interested in it again. I don't know. And then for like, if that's the case, then maybe Avatar won't be so lucky. But I don't know. I mean, that's just what I think. I don't know. What do you think?
Okay, so I think the third movie is really the make or break in terms of the story side.
Yeah.
And even if the box office for this third film, which now would come out 2 years after the second, is it 2 years? No, 3 years, because December 2022. Yeah, like 3 years after the second. Sorry, still adjusting to the new time, the new release dates that Disney just announced. But yeah, so the third movie will be 3 years out from the second, assuming it doesn't get delayed even further. Let's say because of the strike or whatever other reason might be. Maybe they're inventing even more new technology for these these other sequels. 3 years is a decent amount of time to wait for a sequel, right? Most trilogies or most sequels take 2 to 3 years to come out. But where I get concerned is 3 years from now, we're probably gonna, we're working towards more Avengers movies. We're working, there's gonna be like 2 new Mission Impossible movies that come out by then. And if the story is kind of the same thing, except now we're just moving forward, you have to think about it this way. If this is indeed basically a TV show with each movie being a new episode in the TV show, um, are $2.3 billion worth of fans going to pop out for 3 more episodes?
Mm-hmm.
And I worry that that's not going to happen. I feel like the next movie, if it fails to make $2 billion, then I would start to get concerned about 4 and 5. And as Disney might too, because what you don't want to have happen is by the time Avatar 5 comes out, you can't even make $1 billion, because the cost of a lot of these movies are very expensive to make because of the technology that goes into making them. And part of the bet that the studio is making and Jimmy C is making is that they're amortizing the cost of the development and production of these movies across the 5 films, which means that they're not really putting all the development costs from an accounting standpoint behind just one movie. They're kind of spreading the load. So I worry that if the sequels to come start to make less and less money, that's going to mean they're less and less likely to break even, and they might lose money. And at that point, even by 3, we may find out exactly where this is headed. But certainly by 4, I think we will have a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
I'm concerned. I'm concerned for sure. Yeah.
Well, I have a question then. So you know more about this than I do because you were the one who told me. But speaking of 3, so you mentioned that they're going to be doing it as like it's going to be a theatrical release, right? The movie version, and then James Cameron was talking about also releasing it as a like a series, right, on Disney Plus. So
yes. Yeah. So sorry, I was trying to pull up the graphic for this.
No, you're good.
I found this. Okay, so let me actually find this article. I found this article a while ago. So this is not like anything that's breaking news per se, but Avatar 3 is meant to be another probably 3-hour long movie, like these usually are. However, James Cameron teased, this is something on comingsoon.net, the website that I pulled this on. He said in an interview around the time Avatar 2 came out that 3, he's thinking about releasing a 9-hour cut on Disney Plus as like a mini series, and he directly references Zack Snyder's Justice League on HBO Max, where basically they released it as like this big 4-hour cut that you can watch in parts if you wanted to, or you can watch it all at once. So he, I gotta wonder, like, it's gonna be expensive to make a 9-hour version of Avatar. Like, these movies are not cheap, and the amount of render time and like the resources, like there's stories out there about how much resources it took for them to render The Way of Water. I can only imagine, like, for a 3-hour movie, how much time and effort and money and I'm sure resources it took. Doing that for 9 hours, I mean, and it's not like this is gonna be. They're going to have a 3-hour version of this for the theaters. And then they're going to be like, oh, by the way, 9-hour version for the. I don't know if you can now, with Disney Plus trying to be profitable, that they would, sanction a 9-hour version of the movie for the streaming platform. I just don't think it financially makes any sense. Like it just doesn't.
But do you think in the long run it could? Because it could lead to like how Disney Plus has all of the Star Wars shows and all of the Marvel shows now. Like, could that lead into making
It
spin-off shows and stuff like that?
Yeah,
Spin-off series.
this could make sense if they're trying to move even more away from Jake Neytiri and their family, like the core characters of the franchise so far. If they want to do more spin-offs and kind of do setups, like in Endgame, they set up the Loki series, like they set up a bunch of other stuff. And so it would make sense if the 9-hour cut introduced us to more characters or gave us more of a background on other smaller minor characters, and then give us basically a foundation to spin those off into their own like series or movies or something. And if that was the case, or even if they like explored maybe like Earth in the world of Avatar as opposed to just staying on Pandora, then to me it might make sense. However, if that's not what they're doing and all we're getting is simply an expanded version of the literal same story that the movie in theaters gives us, then I will become concerned. The other thing I would be concerned about is because it's a balance you have to make. You can't go so far out from what the movie in theaters is that if somebody who watched the movie in theater and then went to see Avatar 4 and they did not see the thing on Disney Plus, the 9-hour version, would they be missing a lot? Like you have to kind of find that balance. So like that concern.
Yeah, he did that. James Cameron did that for Aliens, the second Alien. He his director's cut is so much better than the theatrical release because I mean you start to see Ridley's background, her backstory. She had a daughter that I think was like 8 or 9 years old, and there's like this one little scene that she's told that because she was looking for her, you know, she'd been in cryo for like 50 years. I don't know how long it was. And so she was asking about her daughter that she left on Earth, and they came back to her and they were like, you know, sorry, but she passed away. She was like in her 60s or 70s or something. And it was like a really sad scene. And then it makes sense when she finds Newt, the little girl that she cares for. Like it makes so much more sense why she cares so much for that kid. I mean, also probably just because she's like a good person, but you know, if it does that, I mean, that would be good. But also it's annoying that you then like I don't like the theatrical version of Aliens. So like are we all gonna dislike the theatrical version of Avatar 3? I don't know. So
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true because you can't, because the thing is if they were to make a 9-hour version of this for Disney Plus, you kind of almost have to be very confident that the movie that's in theaters is going to do really, really well. Because unless you're just gonna take like an extra, I mean, I'm sure they'll have plenty of time between 3 and 4 to be like, oh, the movie in theaters did really well. Now let's work on the 9-hour version. However, I do worry that if they did that, then that takes away time and resources from working on 4 and 5.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's. I don't know when if James Cameron, when he said this, that he actually like had a plan in place to make this happen, or if this is just speculation on his part, or more like him opining that ideally it's like wishful thinking almost, that he would like to do it, but Disney hasn't really quite told him like whether they do this or not.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So then he may not even end up doing that, but he might try to push for a series anyway, like a spinoff, something like that.
Yeah.
Would you want to? Would you want to see that?
I would love to see more spinoffs and kind of going in different directions and essentially exploring the world of Pandora without having Jake and Neytiri in there, because I think their stories already had their happily ever after, and by the time you get to 3 and maybe even a second time with like kids and move it on, and I would love to see the story kind of go, especially certainly beyond Quaritch. Like I'm sorry, like I love Stephen Lang and everybody, like and Sigourney Weaver even, but let's just explore the universe of this franchise from different perspectives. That's something that people have been opining for with Star Wars. Like we don't just want to keep the same characters over and over again. The universe is huge. Like let's get other people in there. So I would love to see the same here, because a Pandora, like even if they did like Pandora the series, and now all of a sudden you have different tribes and they had different leading characters, not only is it going to freshen up the franchise, but after 5 movies, let's say they get that far, I would think that people would be done like with Jake and Neytiri like by that time, if they haven't already been tired of them by 3 or 4. So
yeah. Well, speaking of which, I mean, if you are wanting to explore the world of Pandora without the main characters. So we both just saw this today, that there is a new Avatar game coming out on December 7th for all consoles and PC. Yeah, what did you think of the trailer?
I'll be honest with you. While I appreciate the concept of the game, and I think this is the kind of thing that will keep Avatar in the conversation until the next movie comes out, something they could have done more of between 1 and 2, and the best that they did was the theme park. I do worry that the quality of the graphics and just overall the way this game looks, I'm like, yes, next gen, and maybe it will look better when you play it on your console and you have your 4K screen in front of you and your PS5 or your Xbox playing the game, or even on PC. The trailer itself seemed either unfinished, or it just didn't, for a franchise that really is almost entirely based on the visuals. The visuals in this trailer didn't quite impress me. Certainly because this franchise, that it not only is good because it looks so groundbreaking and colorful and amazing, but just the cinematic quality of every shot of these movies it just leads me to want to see the same in the game. And this game felt too much like every other game, like that's an open world alien kind of a. I'm trying to think of specific examples, but I'm sure like Event Horizon, for example, like there's like other.
I was just
so many
thinking
games out there that are like this, that look like that now, that I feel like in order for Avatar to work in the video game world, it needs to kind of lean into what the movies look like, and this just doesn't do that for me enough.
Oh yeah, I know. I was shocked when I was watching this. I mean, I said it to you earlier. I couldn't believe it. Like I said, like the jungle just didn't even look as full and full of life as the movie. And I just don't understand. They have such a great reference. Is it that the game just didn't have a big enough budget? Like I don't really understand. Like I mean, some of these shots look okay, but it just like that, for instance. When do you ever see the world looking like that, Like
It
it's
looks
just
too much like a video game. You know what I mean?
yes, it looks
Very
so empty.
like, and then here's the thing: the Avatar movies look very photoreal. That's again one of the big selling points. So yeah, I do worry that. Look, well, here's the thing: when you're playing a game, you're just as interested in the game mechanics and like hitting your goals and having fun and controlling the characters you've only ever seen in a movie kind of do their own thing. It's also still about the visuals, and while I'm sure, like I said, like some of this might be because this game isn't out yet, and then usually that means that they're still working on it. Like trailers are usually made with unfinished footage sometimes, even for games.
I hope.
Like they're not giving you final renders. So yeah, I hope that we will see the final game and it will look better and play better than what the trailer shows. But so far, I would have to say, for a franchise that leans so heavily and relies on the visuals to really be all that it is, this trailer was a little more disappointing than I would have hoped for. However, the concept of a game like this is, I think, strong enough that I'm willing to give it a chance. Like when this game comes out, I'll try it, and if it works, it works. I mean, and you know what? If you're Avatar crazy and you don't want to wait for the next movie, and you just had this bad news break that the next movie is delayed by a year and is not going to be out now for another 2 years, like until 2025, and not just 2025 till December 2025, this may be what tides you over. I mean, you do this, you go to the theme park, you rewatch the 2 movies, and then you rinse and repeat until the Avatar 3 comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, there actually was an Avatar game after the first movie, but I think it just did so poorly that it wasn't really huge. I heard about it and I got super excited. I looked it up. Terrible reviews, mostly complaining about the graphics, funny enough. So I don't know if history is repeating itself.
I thought I was gonna play the movie in a video game. Like sorry, PlayStation 4s can't really do that. Or PlayStation 3s, whichever was around at the time.
I think it was PlayStation 3. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right.
So.
Well, with that, I have to say, while this conversation can literally go on for days because Avatar is such an expansive world, I do hope that for a world that is as expansive and as promising in terms of just the possibilities, the movies so far for me, like the first one was fantastic. The second one a little underwhelming in some ways, especially the story sense. I hope that as they go along with new sequels and whatever else they do, more games, TV shows, whatever, like I hope they continue to expand and explore more of the world and from more perspectives than we have gone so far. I think that to me is the thing that they can be improved upon. And let's hope, fingers crossed, that we get no more delays on these. Because like, I'm sorry, but not that I'm like anxiously waiting for the next movie to come out. I just kind of want the next one to come out so that we can kind of keep going. Because I want to see this franchise not leave me with the lukewarm taste in my mouth that the second movie did. Like the sooner we can clean that out and go in and do some exciting new direction with the third movie, the better. So that's what I hope for. I mean, and any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, please just don't make me hate it. Like all I ask is that it's okay if I always just kind of feel like how I do about the second one, which is just it's kind of meh and I'm disappointed. But I just really don't want to reach a point where I hate it. That's all I hope for. But you know what? I might be hoping for too much. Maybe I'll just have to. I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna have to lower my expectations. That's how I've had to do that with so many different franchises lately. So
Yeah. No,
not to sound so pessimistic.
I know but it's true. It's true. There's a lot of franchises out there that seem to have been chasing quantity over quality, and I hope that's not what Avatar ends up being. I know that again, as being a fan of Jimmy C, I know that he is a fan of quality over quantity, but I think he's treading the line at this point because simply the amount of work he's given himself with this franchise. So I hope that the quality endures in the end. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I agree. Well,
Huh?
Danny K, I want to thank you so much for having me
Hey,
on.
no, only Jimmy C gets to call me Danny K. I'm sorry. That's just we have that like
Okay.
person like
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Mr. Khan.
Khan. Mr. Khan's my dad. You can call me Dan. The name of the
Okay.
show.
All right, Dan. All right, fine. We'll go with that. Dan, thank you so much for having me on. I had a great time. I hope you did too.
This was great. I think we should do this more often. Obviously maybe not about Avatar every time, but we should more often for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I know we talked about a lot here. Certainly, if you want to go look at all the dates that we got, new dates for all these Disney movies that got shuffled around, including Avengers, Star Wars, and the Avatar movies, Deadpool, Moana, all of these movies. You can go to the Hollywood Reporter. You can go to the Wrap. All of these big sites have the article out talking about the new dates of these movies and when they're going to be coming out. Of course, if you want to watch more of the Avatar movies, they're on Disney Plus now. Avatar: The Way of Water just released on Disney Plus. I think it was this week or the week before, just early June. And of course, the new game is coming out on December 7th. So check that out if you like, The Frontiers of Pandora. We're going to be back on the Dan Show soon, hopefully next week, if not the week after. We're still trying to figure out the schedule of this thing. It's brand new, but we're hoping to do more of this, to have these fantastic conversations. Hopefully Catriona will be back. We'll probably bring some other folks from the team as well. And we look forward to having you join us in these conversations. And if you like what you see, then hit the like button and subscribe for more. We'll see you back here on the Dan Show soon.